So, I recently watched the Backrooms 2026 by Ken Penders. Wait, that's not right. Uh, Kane Parson. And honestly, I didn't care for it. I found it really lost momentum about halfway through, and honestly, I don't really understand why people find the whole liminal spaces thing scary to begin with. To me, they just remind me of all the weird cult like churches my grandparents would force me to go to with them when I was little. Ooh, empty hallways, so scary. But as I'm talking about this film, I want to make it clear I have no knowledge about the original story or like any internet culture stuff that comes around the Backrooms, because it was way past my time because I'm old and I didn't find it scary. So I'm coming from a point of view strictly from what the movie presented. So if you haven't seen the movie, I'll cover the basics real quick. The movie follows Clark. Dude's a whiny alcoholic who runs a shitty furniture store. He finds a magic door in the lower levels of the store that leads to the back rooms. Just a bunch of yellow hallways that try to replicate stuff from the real world really poorly. It reminds me of those images that at first glance look like a bedroom, but the more you stare, like it's just kind of gibberish. I think they're supposed to stimulate what it's like to have a stroke. Anyways, Clark ends up going missing, and his therapist goes looking for him, finds the door, and also gets lost in the back rooms. Eventually, Clark finds her, and we see he's gone a little cuckoo bananas. He ties her up and takes her back to this weird pseudo house in the back rooms. Now, this is where I wanted to get to in the story. Also, just a side note, there's no way it should have been this late into the movie before anything really started rolling. This is like an hour into the movie. As the therapist is tied up in the kitchen with Clark, we see three other like humanoid backroom entities. One looks like a little person in a wheelchair that's like fused with a lamp. It feels very Lynchian, this character in particular. I'm sure that's what the director was going for. One that looks like a fat guy with too many eyes. He kind of looks like the fat guy in Parks and Rec they were always really mean to. And then finally, we get one that kind of looks like a woman, but with too many faces, and red hair with a Carmen Sandiego ass jacket. We soon learn that Clark has been surviving by eating these things when we see him cut like a massive chunk out of the fat one and start eating it. Maybe this is just me being a fat ass, but it kind of looks like that marshmallow fluff glue stuff you would used to use in school. And honestly, I'd probably try a bite. But I couldn't stop thinking about one thing during this scene, and that was, I wonder if Clark was cracking that red one or not. Of course, then that leads to the train of thought of, what's the morality of that? I'm sure there's no law about it, but legality isn't really what's important to me here. We're talking about morality. So, is it immoral to crack one of the backroom entities? As I got to thinking about this, I think we need to set up a baseline of what is and isn't moral to crack. Now, my initial thought was it's immoral to bang any living thing that doesn't give you consent. But then the more I thought about it, I don't think that's really a well thought out enough response or true. I think the majority of us would agree banging an animal or a human that didn't give consent is morally wrong. But what about something like a tree or grass? That stuff is sentient and it's alive, but I don't think any of us would really care about like banging a tree. It's weird, sure, but it's not really immoral technically. So then I was thinking, okay, anything that's sentient that doesn't give consent except trees and like plants. But then I got to thinking about it a little more, and I don't know, because something seems just wrong to me if you were to like jerk off into a Venus flytrap. Like, sure, I doubt it cares any more than any other, like, tree or plant would. It just seems kind of weird. But, regardless, we need to look at, like, what the other side of a line graph of what would be completely moral to, like, clap. Anything that would be 100% moral under any circumstances. So, my first thought was, obviously, anything that's an inanimate object. Maybe weird if you fuck a desk or a couch, but nothing inherently immoral about it. But then I got to thinking, I don't know, technically a dead body is an inanimate object, but I think most of us would agree that's pretty immoral. So I thought, well, what if we extend that definition to any inanimate object that's your property? But then we're back to the idea of a dead body, because I also think most of us would agree, like, An animal's dead body would be immoral to crack, probably highly immoral. But it is your property and it is an inanimate object. But something doesn't sit right to me if someone were to like get a dog, stuff it, and then fuck it. That just seems really off base. So then I had to pull back and think, okay, let's say any inanimate object that was never alive and your property is totally fine to crack. But then, even then, I don't think it covers it because I came to the thought, is there anything immoral about cracking a sex doll? My first thought, of course, was no way. If you want to drop the cash on it, that's all you. But then I decided to go online and start looking at them. And I was quickly able to find some that, let's say the age of them looks extremely questionable, especially some of those expensive anime ones. So, finally, after this frankly insane line of thinking, I've come to the conclusion, as far as morality goes, we can safely say you can crack any inanimate object that's your property that was never alive and doesn't bear the resemblance of someone who can't or didn't give consent in some way. And I think this will give us both sides of the line graph right now. We have completely moral and completely immoral. So now this brings us back to the backroom entities. Where would they fall on this chart? I don't think, personally, they are alive in the traditional sense that at least humans are, but that doesn't really matter because we've already established some things can be sentient and it's still okay to crack them. It's weird, but still okay. So that had me start to think, what do these backroom entities most closely resemble in our own world? And so I really got to thinking, and I think I've picked something. I think after a lot of thought, the backroom entities would be closest to a fungus or a mushroom of some kind. In fact, their insides even kind of remind me a little bit of a mushroom. And then they have other properties that also remind me of mushrooms and fungus. For instance, mushrooms and fungus will sometimes move towards or away from something that they perceive a threat or as food. Of course, this is really slow just because of the way they work, but there are some things that are clear threats that could happen to them quickly or even slowly, and they won't really move away or stop. Like any human can walk up to a mushroom patch and just start like kicking the shit out of them, and they're not gonna move or do anything. Much like the backroom entities, you can walk up and cut a chunk out of them to eat, and they just kind of stand there. Like we see Clark scalp this one in the Carmen Sandiego jacket, and she just kind of takes it. She doesn't even care. We only see her show any fear when another stronger backroom entity shows up, and then she almost shows like a primal desire to get away out of fear of being eaten by it. So I think we can say that the backroom entities are sentient, but closer to a mushroom or plant of some kind than they are a human or an animal. So my first thought was, yes, they're okay to crack. But then I came back to my point earlier over on this side that they shouldn't bear the resemblance of any living thing that didn't give consent. But then I got to thinking, like, technically, they only slightly resemble it, but not quite because of the nature of the backrooms. So it's kind of in a weird gray area more than anything. But overall, I think if we follow everything I've set up, we could probably place the backroom entities somewhere roughly right about here. So it's not 100% moral, but it's not really immoral either. Maybe slightly. Overall, I think it would still be okay to do, just a little weird and people would probably side-eye. But anyways, thanks so much for watching. Have a good rest of your day and be safe.